Bangladesh on the Brink, Shadow Powers, Political Massacre, and the Eclipse of Secular Democracy by Shafiqul Islam. From Free Inquiry's online columns at secularhumanism.org. In July 2024, a nationwide revolt erupted in Bangladesh over a civil service job quota policy. That policy had reserved many positions for descendants of veterans of Bangladesh's 1971 war for independence from Pakistan. Student-led protests escalated from Dhaka to other cities. Rather than engaging with protesters, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's administration responded with police brutality, mass arrests, and internet blackouts. By late July, over 130 civilians had been killed in confrontations. On August 5th, protesters overran the Prime Minister's residence. The military refused to intervene. Hasina fled to India under pressure from army leadership. Her departure caused the swift collapse of her administration. Within days, Parliament was dissolved, and Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus was appointed to lead an interim government on August 8, 2024. While many students initially celebrated the regime change as a victory for democracy, what followed was an erosion of institutional stability. Many suspect that this collapse was orchestrated by opportunistic forces long seeking to delegitimize the secular narrative of Bangladesh. The sudden withdrawal of the military's support from Hasina's elected government indicates deeper fissures within the state apparatus, suggesting the presence of a calculated, premeditated political maneuver. Bangladesh's historical struggle with authoritarian backsliding adds weight to the suspicion that this was more a soft coup than a democratic transition. This interim administration has no clear constitutional legitimacy. Bangladesh's Supreme Court had previously declared non-elected caretaker governments unconstitutional in 2011. Though initially welcomed by the protesting masses and a segment of civil society, Yunus's administration has failed to protect civil liberties or establish a credible electoral roadmap. Supporters and activists of the Awami League, historically one of Bangladesh's major political parties, face widespread persecution, and religious minorities have been targeted in renewed attacks. Critics argue that the current regime is operating under emergency decrees with limited public accountability. There are growing concerns that the interim government lacks both the mandate and moral authority to restructure political institutions. Moreover, its inability to rein in extremist groups and re-establish the rule of law is exacerbating the chaos. Since 2013, Bangladesh has experienced a wave of Islamist violence. Extremist groups have assassinated secular bloggers, intellectuals, and publishers. Avijit Roy, Ananta Bijoy Das, and others were murdered in brutal public attacks. Though some perpetrators were caught, many were shielded by political factions or remained at large. These attacks are not isolated events. They form a systemic assault on Bangladesh's secular foundations. The pattern of targeted killings reveals a chilling strategy to eliminate critical voices that challenge religious orthodoxy, nationalism, or political authoritarianism. These assassinations send a broader message. Intellectual freedom and dissent are dangerous pursuits in modern Bangladesh. The failure to bring perpetrators to justice has emboldened militant groups, encouraging further attacks. In July 2025, a special tribunal, originally established to try 1971 war criminals, began prosecuting former Prime Minister Hasina and her ministers for crimes against humanity. These charges, including allegations of ordering violence during the 2024 protests, have been condemned by international human rights groups as politically motivated. The move appears designed to delegitimize Hasina's legacy and entrench the interim regime. What is most troubling is the selective use of judicial power. While former government leaders are tried under dubious charges, known extremists and instigators of anti-secular violence enjoy impunity. Legal experts have warned that this dual system of justice may set a precedent for institutional collapse, where courts become tools of vendetta rather than vehicles for justice. The downfall of Hasina has empowered ultra-conservative and Islamist forces, some with long-standing opposition to Bangladesh's independence. Jamaat-e-Islami and splinter militant groups have allegedly used the student protests as a cover to destabilize the state. Their goal appears to be the dismantling of the secular state and reintroduction of a religious nationalist regime, antithetical to the spirit of 1971. Analysts observe that these groups were never fully dismantled after the 1971 war. They remained embedded in the political landscape, often rebranded under various alliances. With the weakening of the Awami League's presence, these groups have resurfaced with renewed vigor, capitalizing on the vacuum created by governmental collapse. Violence has escalated sharply. In one instance, 15 police officers were killed in Sirajganj. Attacks on Awami League supporters and police installations have become frequent. Minority communities, especially Hindus and Buddhists, report threats and violence. Bangladesh risks slipping into a prolonged conflict between ideological factions, paramilitary groups, and politically aligned militias. The term civil war may appear premature, but the signs are evident. Armed factions are consolidating, state authority is weakened, and regional power brokers are aligning behind rival camps. A continuation of current trends could fracture the country along ideological and sectarian lines, unleashing violence unseen since the 1971 Liberation War. An unstable Bangladesh poses risks for South Asia. Border security with India has tightened. Economic disruptions from strikes and blockades have affected regional trade. Human rights groups warn of potential refugee outflows if the situation deteriorates further. India, which shares a porous border with Bangladesh, is already experiencing political pressure from the rising influx of persecuted minorities. The Rohingya refugee crisis, still unresolved, may be compounded by a second wave of political asylum seekers. International observers must also consider how instability in Bangladesh could embolden extremist ideologies across the subcontinent. Recommendations: restore constitutional order. Immediate steps must be taken to establish an elected, inclusive government. Protect human rights. Detainees must be released or tried fairly. Freedom of the press and expression must be upheld. Dismantle militant networks. The state must crack down on Islamist sleeper cells and extremist organizations. Ensure minority protection. Immediate safeguards are needed for religious and ethnic minorities. Invite international oversight. Election observers and human rights monitors should be allowed access to ensure transparency. Support civil society. Independent journalists, artists, and rights defenders must be protected as vital pillars of democracy. Bangladesh now stands at a perilous crossroads. The 1971 liberation vision, a secular, democratic state, faces obliteration unless swift and collective action is taken. With both ideological militants and shadow state actors mobilizing, the country is sliding further from institutional democracy and may spiral toward full-blown civil conflict. The suppression of dissent, selective prosecutions, systematic persecution of Awami League activists, and resurgence of Islamist militancy are more than political turbulence. They signal a concerted effort to rewrite Bangladesh's identity by force. It is not too late, but unless the international community, civil society, and democratic nations act decisively, Bangladesh risks losing its republican promise and entering a dark new chapter of internal warfare. Thank you for listening to this audio edition of Free Inquiry, the journal for secular humanist ideas. If you enjoyed this article, consider subscribing to Free Inquiry magazine to explore more thought-provoking content on reason, ethics, science, and free thought. You can find more articles, subscribe, or support our work at secularhumanism.org. There you'll also discover resources on secular humanism, information on upcoming events, and ways to connect with a community of like-minded thinkers. If you believe in the importance of reason, free expression, and humanist values, consider making a donation to support our work. Every contribution helps us continue to publish, advocate, and provide resources for a more rational, secular world. Once again, thanks for listening and for supporting free inquiry, free minds, and free expression.